Welcome to the online class lecture of Professor S.K. Paul, HOD, University Department of English, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. Dear students of PG Semester 1, good afternoon. This is CC2 Unit 1. Today I am going to discuss on the topic it is summary and analysis of a few acts and scenes in Hamlet. Act 2 and 3 with their scenes in Hamlet. Act 2 and 3 with their scenes in Hamlet. Act 2 of Hamlet begins with Polonius speaking to one of his servants, Rinaldo, about his son Laertes, who has by this time returned to Paris. We see Polonius in the act of sending Rinaldo after Laertes to inquire into his son's conduct. He instructs Rinaldo very precisely in the method of obtaining this information. First, Rinaldo is to find out from strangers in Paris about the prominent dens in the city without revealing that he has any particular attachment to Laertes. When Laertes' name comes up, Rinaldo is to pretend to have some distant knowledge of him, and is further to suggest that he knows of Laertes as something of a happy-go-lucky youth given to gambling, drinking, fencing, swearing, fighting, and whoring. By this path of insinuation, Polonius explains that Rinaldo will hear from his hypothetical Parisian interlocutor the unvarnished truth about Laertes' conduct in France, having thus prepared Leonardo to spy on his son. Polonius sends him off. Ophelia enters, distraught. She tells her father that Hamlet has frightened her with his wild, unkempt appearance and deranged manners. After Ophelia describes Hamlet's behavior, she further reveals that as per Polonius' orders, she has cut off all contact with Hamlet and has refused his letters. Polonius reasons thus that Hamlet's madness is the result of Ophelia's rejection. He had thought that Hamlet was only trifling with her, but it turns out he now declares that Hamlet was indeed deeply in love with Ophelia. Polonius hurries off to tell Claudius and Gertrude that he has discovered the reason for their son's odd behavior. Act 2, Scene 2 of Hamlet, Scene 2. King Claudius has made plans of his own to discover the reasons for Hamlet's supposed madness. He has summoned two of Hamlet's school friends, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, both to comfort his nephew come son and to try to discover the reason for his distemper. So he says, the two scholars are only too happy to oblige in this task. After Rosencrantz and Guildenstern leave the royal presence, Polonius rushes in, announcing that he has found the reason for Hamlet's madness. Before he reveals his news, however, he entreats Claudius and Gertrude to hear from the two ambassadors to Norway, Voltimand and Cornelius, who have just returned. They report that the King of Norway, after looking into his nephew Fortinbras's actions, found out that he was indeed planning to invade Denmark. The King of Norway then rebuked Fortinbras and ordered him to abandon his plan of his plan of a Danish conquest, which young Fortinbras agreed to do. Overjoyed at his nephew's acquiescence, Norway then awarded Fortinbras with a generous annual allowance. Further, Norway granted Fortinbras a leave to levy a war against the Polish. Finally, the ambassadors report that Norway seeks Claudius's permission to allow Fortinbras passage through Denmark. In this proposed campaign against Poland, Claudius declares his approval of this message and says that he will consider its details anon. Polonius steps forward to reveal his discovery. He tells the king and queen in a very roundabout way that he has discovered Hamlet's foiled love of Ophelia and that he believes this to be the case. Polonius has a plan. He offers to lose Ophelia on Hamlet while he is reading alone in the library. Meanwhile, he suggests he and Claudius could hide behind a tapestry and observe the meeting. Claudius agrees. Just then Hamlet enters, reading. Gertrude and Claudius exit while Polonius attempts to speak to Hamlet. Hamlet plays with Polonius, mocking him, evading his questions, and turning his language inside out. Nevertheless, Polonius reads between the lines, as it were, and interprets Hamlet's nonsensical replies as motivated by a broken heart. Polonius lives to contrive the proposed meeting between Hamlet and his daughter. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern enter, surprising their friend Hamlet. The three friends banter philosophically for a good while before Hamlet asks the two why they have come to Elsinore. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern try to dodge his question, this question declaring that they have come for no other reason than to visit him. Hamlet, though, won't let them off the hook and makes them admit that the king and queen sent for them. When they admit it, Hamlet also tells them why they were sent for, because he has deeply melancholy and has foregone his accustomed behavior. He sinks deeply into a speech detailing this misery. Rosencrantz changes the subject. He tells Hamlet that he and Guildenstern passed a troop of players on their way to Elsinore. They gossip briefly about the city theatres. The troupe had left before coming to Denmark, presumably those of London. Soon the players arrive with a flourish. Polonius rushes back into the scene, bearing the already stale news that the players have arrived. Hamlet banters with Polonius in the same mocking vein as before until the players burst into court, at which point Hamlet rushes up to welcome them. Hamlet insists upon hearing a speech straight away, and in particular requests a recitation based on a scene in Virgil's Aeneid, as related by Aeneas to Dido, recounting the death of Priam during the fall of Troy. Hamlet himself begins the speech and then cedes the floor to one of the players, who recites a long and fustian description of Priam's death by Pyrrhus's hand. The player goes on to speak of the wild grief of Hecuba, Priam's wife, after her husband has been killed. While speaking of her agony, the player begins to weep and shake. Polonius finally cuts him off, and Hamlet agrees. Before the players retire, however, Hamlet pulls the main player aside and asks him whether the company knows a certain play, The Murder of Gonzago. The player says that they do, and Hamlet commissions it for the following night, saying that he will write some speeches of his own to be inserted into the play as written. The player says that this would be fine and then takes his leave. Left alone on stage, Hamlet muses about the strangeness of his situation. He asks himself, how can this player be so filled with grief and rage over Priam and Hecuba, imaginary figures whom he doesn't even know, while I, who have every reason to rage and grieve and seek bloody revenge, am weak, uncertain, and incapable of action. He curses himself and his indecisiveness, his plan to make sure that the ghost of his father is genuine, that the apparition was not some evil spirit sent to lure his soul to damnation. He declares his intention to stage a play exactly based on the murder of his father. While it is played, he will observe Claudius. If the king is guilty, Hamlet figures surely he will show this guilt when faced with the scene of the crime. This act begins by establishing the atmosphere of political intrigue at Elsinore. Polonius plots to spy on Laertes by means of Rinaldo. Claudius and Gertrude plot to spy on Hamlet by means of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Norway foils Fortinbras's plot to invade Denmark only to assist him in a venture against Poland. It seems that everyone in Elsinore is plotting against everyone else. Significantly, though these intrigues are represented as a very clumsy, if not stupid, Polonius. Polonius's instructions to Rinaldo are so comically complex and so circuitously related that he himself loses track of them at one point. And his attempt to relate his great discovery of Hamlet's broken heart to Claudius and Gertrude in the second scene does not go any better. Brevity is the soul of wit, he says. Another instance of Polonius is getting one of Shakespeare's most famous and most often decontextualized lines, and he then proceeds to be anything but brief, anything but witty. Rather, he is dull, pedantic, self important, pompous, flowery, and more to the point, dead wrong. As in Act 1, Polonius obviously fancies himself a great political mind. We might beg to differ. Claudius too shows remarkable political stupidity in trusting to the espionage of the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two rather clownish fellows whom Hamlet sees through instantly. Moreover, the Norway episode reveals Claudius's blunt instincts quite clearly. He appears ready to agree to allow Fortinbras, whom only days before had planned to take over his realm, to march through Denmark on his way to conquer Poland. This is sort of like allowing Canada to march through the United States in order to attack Mexico. In other words, it makes no sense at all, strategically or logistically. Claudius and Polonius try as they might to play the part of Machiavellian lords of state are really quite out of their depth. Hamlet, however, has found his element in Act 2. His language is dazzling, full of wild puns, inventive jokes, and succinct and strong observations, sheer mastery. His repartee with Polonius, for instance, plays brilliantly with the notion of method in madness, as Polonius puts it. He plays the role of the melancholic madman almost as though Polonius is a gullible audience member. Hamlet toys with Polonius, leading the old fool to think just what he wants. In short, Hamlet appears in this act as the only truly gifted politician, the only accurate reader of men's minds in the whole of Elsinore. Why then is he so reluctant to act, so incapable, it seems, of action? Why does he not even mention revenge until the very last speech of the act? It seems that Hamlet is so obsessed with contemplating the meaning of action that he is rendered unable to act himself. This is the central question of Hamlet, of course, and one that has frustrated and intrigued readers for centuries. The transition from the Hamlet of Act 1, Scene 5, so willing and eager to kill Claudius, to the Hamlet of Act 2, Hamlet of the Act 2, Scene 2, where he is witty and evasive and ultimately impotent, is really quite absurd. It's almost as though we have suddenly landed in another play, one not about revenge but about something else, about madness or politics or about the very meaning of acting. This theme comes to a head, of course, with the appearance of the troupe of players. The handling of the players in Hamlet places the play firmly in the genre of a meta theater or a theater about theater. The scenes with the players are full of in jokes about theatrical happenings in Shakespeare's own day, the rise in popularity of boy acting troupes, for instance. In another winking moment in Act 3, Polonius declares that he was an actor in his younger days. I did enact Julius Caesar, he says. I was killed in the Capitol. Brutus killed me. In fact, scholars surmise Shakespeare staged Hamlet immediately following his own Julius Caesar. Here are two moments among many, then where Shakespeare refers outside of the play to the reality of London stage culture, where in fact the play is actually taking place at the time of its first performances. What is he up to with these references? Are they simply jokes? Are they simply jokes, or do they point to some deeper concerns? It seems that Shakespeare is blurring the lines between theatricality and reality. He insists that we see his play as occurring at the same time in the fantasy world of Elsinore and in the actual world of the Globe Theatre in London in the early 17th century, which for us at our historical remove is yet another layer of fantasy. He writes elsewhere in As You Like It, all the world's a stage. In Hamlet, he takes this notion a step further, giving us a play that presses relentlessly on the a primordial relationship between acting in the theater and acting in real life. Is there ever a moment when we as human beings are not playing a role in one way or another? Are the tears that we shed for the loss of our loved ones any more genuine than the tears that an actor sheds for the imaginary death of Priam, the imaginary grief of Hecuba? If so, how? Why? And this, of course, is the subject of Hamlet's second soliloquy, which close the act. What's Hecuba to him or he to her? He asks, he asks of the player who has just wept for his fictional subject. Shakespeare has layered this speech so carefully and so vertiginously that it might be helpful simply to bracket out the several planes of meaning on which it operates. First, Hamlet speaks of the man on the stage who has shown such an outpouring of emotion for Hecuba, while he, Hamlet, who has every reason to show such grief himself, remains cold and reluctant to act. But on another level, Hamlet himself is an actor on a stage and has no more reason to wail and grieve and gnash his teeth than the player who spoke of Hecuba does. While he is philosophizing about the nature of pretended grief versus a real grief, all is ultimately pretension. There is no Hamlet. There was no poisoning, not really. On this second level, it seems almost as though Hamlet knows that he is in a play. He does not hurry along the revenge because he knows there is nothing really to revenge. Nothing really happened. It has all been staged. Of course, he can't really know this, but Shakespeare creates the effect of self-awareness and self-doubt that reaches beyond the limitations of the stage. Somehow he is able to explore these philosophical questions while maintaining a compelling plot line. Now, a summary and analysis of Act 2, Scene 2. The king and queen enter with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and others. King Claudius has summoned Hamlet's two school chums to Elsinore to have them spy on the prince and report back to Claudius, recounting Hamlet's every move. The queen promises them a handsome compensation for their spying and assures them that Hamlet's own good requires the service. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern agree. The two leave to seek Prince Hamlet, and the king and queen turn their attention to Polonius, who claims to have the answer to Prince Hamlet's affliction. He promises to elaborate further after Claudius receives his newly arrived ambassadors from Norway. When Polonius exits, Gertrude scoffs at the old man's intimations. She remains certain that Hamlet's woes are caused by the old king's death and her hasty remarriage. Polonius returns with the ambassadors Voltimand and Cornelius. They bring news from Norway that the old and the ailing king, brother to the slain king Fortinbras, has managed to restrain his nephew, young Fortinbras, from invading Denmark. In return, however, the old man asks that Denmark provide some assistance in Fortinbras's campaign against Poland, that Claudius allow Fortinbras to pass through Denmark on his way to Poland. As soon as the ambassadors leave, Polonius launches into an elaborate discussion on the meaning of life and duty, promising to be brief and then launching into further worldliness. Finally, Polonius asserts that Hamlet is mad. Having no patience for Polonius, Gertrude admonishes him. Again, promising to be less loquacious, Polonius makes a showy, wavy motions and with his arms, and then reads a letter he confiscated from his daughter, written in the prince's hand. Polonius criticizes the highly dramatic, artificial prose with random rhymes in which Hamlet has written the note and tells Claudius and Gertrude that he has forbidden uh, Ophelia to accept any advances from the prince. That is the order. Polonius claims that has led poor Hamlet into madness. Polonius then suggests that he and Claudius hide themselves behind a needlework wall hanging so they can eavesdrop on the couple when Ophelia meets with Hamlet to return his love gifts. Claudius agrees just as Hamlet enters reading. Polonius asks the king and the queen to leave them so that he may speak he may speak to Hamlet himself. In the encounter that follows between Hamlet and Polonius, Hamlet warns Polonius to watch his daughter carefully and then toys with Polonius's limited wit. The exchange convinces Polonius that Hamlet is lovesick when in actuality Hamlet's responses have done little but ridicule Polonius. Polonius leaves, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern enter. Hamlet greets them as his excellent good friends and asks why they have come to his prison. They grouse at his choice of words, but he tells them Denmark's a prison. Rosencrantz wittily replies, then is the world one. Hamlet breaks through his friend's resistance, and the two family admit that the king and queen sent them to observe Hamlet and provide them with details of his behavior. Hamlet's melancholy then erupts in a blank verse complaint that he has lately lost all my mirth. He laments that a foul and sickening fog now besmirches the heavens, which he once saw as a canopy freighted with golden fire. Hamlet then indicts the very nature of mankind. Rosencrantz seizes the opportunity to announce the arrival of the players, and Hamlet's mood shifts yet again. Ecstatic at the opportunity for diversion, Hamlet asks who the players are and why they are on the road. Rosencrantz answers that they are on the road because a company of child actors has usurped the London stage. Hamlet responds by saying that he welcomes Rosencrantz and Guildenstern as he welcomes the actors and hopes he can be a worthy host Polonius enters to announce the arrival of the players. When the players enter, Hamlet requests that the lead player perform a speech from Virgil's Aeneid, in which Aeneas tells Queen Dido the story of Pheidus, whose father Achilles was killed at Rome. The player performs the speech and moves himself to tears over Hecuba's horror at seeing her husband dismembered. Hamlet asks Polonius to see to the player's lodging, and as soon as the Lord Chamberlain has left, he tells the small group of players remaining on stage his plans for their performance of the murder of Gonzago. He tells them that he will provide them with 12 to 16 original lines that he wants them to add to the play. They agree and they leave. Hamlet then reveals his real intentions for the murder of Gonzago. The players will perform the play with an enhanced scene which will enact the murder the ghost has described. Hamlet hopes that seeing his crime reenacted in front of the assembled audience will make Claudius act guilty and reveal that he murdered King Hamlet. Such an admission will prove to Hamlet once and for all, and the ghost is real and not simply a devil or the figment of his imagination. Gertrude implies in her opening verse to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern that she and Claudius have invited the pair to Denmark for Hamlet's benefit, although Claudius may have ulterior motives. Gertrude is the person who insisted on contacting Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and bringing them to court because of the friendship and respect that Hamlet bears for them. At this point in the play, one can reasonably assume that both Claudius and Gertrude had Hamlet's welfare in mind when they summoned the two Germans to court. Claudius, however, is once again aware that all eyes are on him as he solicitously welcomes Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and expresses his grave concern for Hamlet's transformation. Although Shakespeare gives no suggestion that Claudius had anything but Hamlet's welfare in mind when he summoned Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to court, the reader knows that Claudius does nothing without self-promotion in mind. His suggestion that they report back any affliction of Hamlet's echoes Polonius's instructions to Rinaldo in Scene 1 regarding Laertes. Both Polonius and Claudius exhibit distrust and deception when dealing with their heirs. When Rosencrantz and Guildenstern heartily agree to do the king's and queen's bidding, Gertrude promises they will receive such thanks as fits a king's remembrance. Claudius has successfully deceived Gertrude as well, convincing her that he loves Prince Hamlet. When Polonius ushers in Cornelius and Voltimand, Claudius's ambassadors to Norway, the old man entices the king with a promise that he knows something about the Lord Hamlet that Gertrude and Claudius cannot know. He refuses to divulge any information until after the ambassadors have left, but he creates excitement over his find. Gertrude, motivated only by her deep, even overprotective love for her son, remains skeptical about Polonius's ability to help. The ambassadors bring good news for Claudius, which cheers the king, and he plans celebratory party. Shakespeare presents here another mirror, young Fortinbras, a dutiful nephew whose uncle has ascended to the throne, that might have been his, obeys his uncle, a sovereign's request to show Denmark leniency. uh, Claudius knows of no reason that his nephew subject would be less cooperative or less charitable, and he is more than willing to toy with Hamlet's good nature. Gertrude expresses her concern for and sensitivity toward Hamlet. She fully understands the trauma he has experienced in returning to Denmark to find his world shattered and reordered. Polonius's plan to spy on Hamlet, to trap him as it were, by exposing a private letter the old man has impounded from his daughter, does not please Gertrude. Her son's welfare concerns her far more than affairs of state. However, Gertrude agrees to Polonius' plan because it affords her the hope that Hamlet's madness merely results from unrequited love, which can be easily remedied. The old man clearly agitates Gertrude, who argues him to disclose something substantive, more matter and less art. However, Polonius' report finally wins her over, and she agrees to Polonius's plan to spy on Hamlet. On Hamlet. Another deception is premeditated and prearranged. Another of Polonius's springs to catch woodcocks, that both Gertrude and Ophelia are complicit with the entrapment is a key to Hamlet's distrust of women and of his inability to allow himself to love either of them. Hamlet enters in his state of apparent madness, yet mad with despair as he may seem on the surface. Hamlet remains sharp enough to volley artfully with words that confound Polonius's limited wit. Hamlet calls the old man a fishmonger, a term life with double um, um, intender, because fish was an off-color allusion to women. Women. Fish sellers were those who sold women's favors, in other words, pimp. Hamlet demonstrates his acute sense of wordplay with his sad cynicism on the subject of honesty. To be honest, as this world goes, is to be one man picked in 10,000. But he clearly convinces Polonius that he is not rational. How pregnant sometimes his replies are! A happiness that often madness hits on, which reason and sanity could not so prosperously be delivered of. Then again, as soon as Polonius exits, Hamlet reveals his true level of reason. These tedious fools. He understands that Polonius is not the only old man he needs to worry about. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern return, and Hamlet elucidates his astuteness once more. He manipulates he manipulates his excellent good friends into admitting they have been sent for. He calls fortune a whore, suggesting that one can buy luck and fate like friendship. He proves that he understands the duplicitous nature of their visit. he further clarifies his presence of mind through his lucid discourse on the nature of dreams and the paradox of human existence. Prison imagery surrounds this scene. Denmark's a prison, he says. In answer to Rosencrantz' retort that then the world must be one. Hamlet assents but asserts that Denmark is one of the worst. The brooding clarity with which Hamlet perceives his predicament reminds us that he has announced that he will wear on an antique disposition, that he is faking his madness. When Polonius announces the arrival of the players and Hamlet again plays with what he perceives as Polonius' meager intelligence. However, Polonius again concludes that Ophelia's rejection is the cause of Hamlet's madness. After the player's rendition of Hecuba's horror, Hamlet expounds to himself on the crux of his dilemma. He compares himself to an actor playing out the drama of his own life, but he cannot find the motivation to move beyond his immobilized state of melancholy. He is stuck in words, in the idea of action, terrified to move forward. The actor acting as Fides, a fictional character, is moved to kill his father's killer. The actor, relating to a fairy tale about a woman's woes, is capable of real emotion. Hamlet is an actor prompted by heaven and hell to seek revenge for his murdered father, but is unschooled in his art and hesitates for fear of the consequences. His judgmental conscience stifles his emotions. He cannot sympathize with Gertrude or follow the ghost's instructions to defend her honor because his fears blind him. His incessant pandering to words emasculates him, that I must, like a whore, unpack my heart with words. But because he is a man of words, he uses first the words of the play in his plan to strike at the king. Hamlet ends the scene by revealing this plan to entrap the king by manipulating the play to force the king's conscience to incriminate him. This time, the premeditated duplicity belongs to Hamlet. Surrounded by false friends and dubious love, Hamlet recognizes an opportunity to use the honest deception of the stage to illuminate the truth. Act 3, Scene 1. An entourage consisting of the king and queen, Polonius and Ophelia, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern enters to begin the act. Claudius asks Rosencrantz and Guildenstern what they have learned about Hamlet's melody. The two reply that they have not been able to find its cause. They do mention, however, that Hamlet was very enthusiastic about the players' performance that night, which prompts Claudius to agree to attend the play. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern leave. Polonius and Claudius then begin their plan to lose Ophelia on Hamlet and mark their encounter. Hoping to find the root of his madness, they instruct Ophelia to pretend that she is simply reading a book and withdraw behind the tapestry. Hamlet enters and delivers the most famous speech in literature, beginning, "To be or not to be, that is the question." After this long meditation on the nature of being and death, Hamlet catches sight of Ophelia. After a short conversation, she attempts to return some of the remembrances that Hamlet gave when courting her. Hamlet replies caustically, questioning Ophelia's honesty. He then berates Ophelia, telling her of sarcastically and venomously with the refrain, "Get thee to nunnery, get thee to a nunnery," or in the words, "Go become a nun to control your lust." After this tirade, Hamlet exists, leaving Ophelia in shambles. Claudius and Polonius set up of their hiding place. The king states that he does not believe that Hamlet is mad because of a foiled love for Ophelia, or really mad at all, but tormented for some hidden reason. He determines to send Hamlet on a diplomatic mission to England before he can cause any serious trouble. Polonius endorses this plan but persists in his belief that Hamlet's grief is a result of his love for Ophelia. He consoles his daughter Polonius, suggests in painting that Claudius arrange a private interview between Hamlet and his mother after the play that evening, and Claudius agrees. Scene 2. Just as the play is about to begin, Hamlet instructs the players on the art of acting, telling them to act naturally and to avoid bombast. He sets the players to their preparations and then conferences with Horatio. After complimenting Horatio in the most sterling terms, Hamlet asks his friend to assist him in watching the king's response to the play, but they are about to see. Apparently, Hamlet has by this time told Horatio what the ghost revealed. Horatio sets himself so as to view the king properly. The royal entourage enters Hamlet. Hamlet manically chatters with Claudius, Polonius, Gertrude, and Ophelia, reserving special attention for the latter, whom he sits next to and teases. The play begins with a dumb show, which is a pantomime of the drama to come. On the stage, the basic form of alleged murder is repeated. A king and queen and queen are shown happily married. The king takes a nap. A prisoner enters and pours something in the king's ear, killing him. The poisoner then takes possession of the queen. Ophelia seems confused by this plot, but Hamlet tells her to wait for the speaker of the prologue to explain. The prologue is a short little jingling rhyme. The player king and queen and then immediately enter the stage. The king mentions that they have been married 30 years. The player queen expresses a hope that their love last as long as over again. The king encourages the queen to remarry if he dies. The queen protests against this notion vehemently, swearing never to love another if were to she turn widow. With this, the king falls asleep and the queen exits. Hamlet asks his mother Gertrude how she likes the play, and Gertrude replies with the famous line, "The lady doth protest too much, methinks." Claudius is also outspokenly apprehensive about the nature of the play. It continues, however, with the entrance of Lucianus, the sleeping king's nephew. This evil character creeps up to the sleeping player king and pours poison in his ear. Hamlet, unable to contain himself, erupts, telling everyone that Lucianus will soon win the love of the king's over protesting life. At this, Claudius rises and orders the play to end. He retreats with his retinue. Hamlet and Horatio laugh together, certain now that the ghost was telling the truth. After a short celebration, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern enter and tell Hamlet that he has made Claudius very angry. They also say that Gertrude has ordered Hamlet to meet her in her chamber. They then entreat Hamlet to tell the cause of his distemper. Hamlet replies mockingly by saying that they are trying to play him like a pipe and that he won't let them. Polonius enters and entreats Hamlet again to see his mother. All exit but Hamlet. In a short soliloquy, Hamlet reflects that he will be cruel to his mother, showing her the extent of the crime in marrying Claudius, but will not actually hurt her. Scene 3. Claudius gives Rosencrantz and Guildenstern a sealed envelope with orders to convey Hamlet to England and give the envelope to the king there. In a highly flattering terms, they agree to do the king's bidding and exit. Polonius then enters, saying that Hamlet is going to meet with his mother and declaring his intention to hide behind an arras and listen to their conversation. He exits alone. The king looks into his soul. He is deeply disgusted by what he sees. He kneels to pray, hoping to purge his guilt, but reflects that this penance will not be genuine because he will still retain the prizes for which he committed murder in the first place, his crown and his life. As Claudius is vainly attempting to pray, Hamlet comes up behind him. He reflects that he now has an opportunity to kill his uncle and revenge his father, but pauses, considering that because Claudius is in the act of prayer, he would likely go straight to heaven if killed. Hamlet resolves to kill Claudius later when he is in the middle of some sinful act. He continues on his mother's chamber. Scene 4. In the chamber awaiting Hamlet's arrival, Polonius hides himself behind one of Gertrude's curtains. Hamlet enters. Gertrude attempts to be firm and chastising, but Hamlet comes right back at her, saying that she has sinned mightily in marrying her husband's brother. He pulls his mother in front of a mirror, saying that he will her inmost reveal her inmost part, and Gertrude momentarily misinterprets this, thinking that Hamlet may attempt to murder her. She cries for help. Polonius, hidden from view, also cries out for help. Hamlet thinks that the hidden voice belongs to Claudius. He stabs Polonius through the curtain, killing him. When he sees that he has killed Polonius, Hamlet declares the old man to be a rash, intruding fool. Quickly forgetting about his death, Hamlet sits his mother down and presents her with two portraits, one of her first husband and the other of Claudius. He describes the two as opposites, the one all nobility and virtue, the other all deformity and vice. Gertrude is deeply affected by this comparison and seems to comprehend the enormity of her sin. Hamlet continues to berate her and describe Claudius in the most foul and hurtful language, while in the middle of this harangue, Old Hamlet's ghost appears once more, telling Hamlet to stop torturing his mother, and to remember his duty to kill Claudius. At the ghost's command, Hamlet consoles his mother Gertrude. Unable to see the ghost, sees Hamlet talking to thin air and resolves that he is indeed insane. The ghost exits. Hamlet tells his mother that he is not in fact insane. He reiterates that she should repent her marriage to Claudius and tells her in particular to stay away from their shared bed for the night. After describing the importance of this abstinence in the most colorful terms, Hamlet reminds his mother that he is ordered to England. Hamlet says that although he will go to England, he will not trust Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. He exits his mother's bedroom, dragging the body of Polonius behind him. One of the most remarkable things about the speech that begins "To be or not to be," the most famous speech in Western literature, is how out of place, how offhand it seems in the larger context of the play. Hamlet has only a few lines before hit upon the play as his means of exposing the king. Why then is he suddenly contemplating suicide? If that's what he is doing in "To be or not to be." This psychological strangeness is true, at least of the version of the play that most of us read, which is a conflation of two Renaissance texts, as explained in the additional content section. In the first printed version of Hamlet, the speech occurs at perhaps a more logical place in Act 2, Scene 2, in place of Hamlet's mocking repartee with Polonius. In these longer, more literary versions of Hamlet, "To be or not to be" arrives as a surprise. It shows down the action just as the action is really beginning to move. This odd out of place effect of the speech is a testament to Hamlet's tendency to become wrapped up in his own thoughts, regardless of his surroundings. In the middle of the urgent business of revenge, Hamlet takes the time to explore the nature of death and human life with a subtlety and eloquence that renders the speech unforgettable. Think of his brain as a sort of obsessive problem solving machine, a focused, powerful instrument that exhausts one subject and then another indiscriminately in short term bursts. Now theater, now death, now sex, now filial duty, and that can only with great difficulty, if at all, focus on a longer term plan such as "I must kill Claudius." So, what is to be or not to be about anyway? This is an enormous question. Entire books have been written on the speech. Most recently, Douglas Bruster's "To Be or Not to Be," and critical consensus as to its nature is far from settled. Most casual readers of Hamlet take the speech to be at its simplest level. But of whom is speaking? Himself, or human beings in general. In other words, the speech can be thought of as a general contemplation of the human condition rather than a specific expression of a desire to die. In an interview in the Atlantic Monthly, the famous Shakespearean Harold Bloom offers an idiosyncratic reading of the speech along the latter lines. It is a testimony, indeed, to the power of the mind over a universe of death, symbolized by the sea, which is the great hidden metaphor. You can read more about this interpretation in his book Hamlet, Poem Unlimited. Up to this point, Ophelia, after all this, though the exposure does not actually lead to the satisfaction of vengeance, just after the play, Hamlet has a chance to kill Claudius and talks himself out of it. Two scenes later, he is shipped off to England, no questions asked. One can speculate on his reasons. To me, it seems almost as thought the exposure thought thought the exposure, though the exposure, the catching of the king's conscience. Act 3, Scene 2. The king and queen enter with Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, Polonius, Ophelia, and members of the court. Claudius questions Rosencrantz and Guildenstern about Hamlet's madness, asking if they have found a reason for Hamlet's behavior. Rosencrantz answers that the prince has admitted to being distracted but will not say from that. From what? Guildenstern says that Hamlet has been crafty in discussing his motivations. The two report that Hamlet is very excited about the play to be presented, and Claudius asks them to encourage him in this regard. So, dear students, today I have completed my lecture. My lecture is over. The lecture is finished, and thank you for your presence, and thank you for remaining here with me for more than an hour. Thank you all of you. Thank you all of you, and happy Dhanteras to all of you. Thank you. Happy Dhanteras, all of you. Enjoy Deepavali with all safety. Uh, with all safety. Celebrate Choti Diwali and Badi Diwali with